My aim is to create a positive example on how to do good business, deliver superior product, but at the same time create a better world for my children and future generations. And that way I can connect my inner passion with what I'm doing every day. I strongly believe in business as an engine for change. If you consider that the world's domestic product last year was almost 72 trillion US dollars, then it's very clear that if we lay out the pebbles in such a way that business moves towards the good, the world will move to good. And if you put the pebbles in the wrong way, the world will go to hell. And if you do that, and if you start rethinking your business, then it's actually quite amazing what you can achieve. There are a lot of things that you think are fixed within your business, but if you rethink, they're not as fixed as you thought. And then in that way, I have found that our current financial crisis is actually a blessing in disguise, because it urges us to reconsider and rethink our business. And especially when I look at my business, the real estate business, it is very clear that it is not only a financial crisis, but we're facing very much a systems crisis. Just look at our industry. Before the Industrial Revolution, buildings were an expression of a people's art, of their culture, and take for instance Notre Dame, it took generations for the building to be built. And now, with a more industrialized building system, we can build cities of hundreds of thousands of people within decades. And that's quite worrying when you consider that the pace with which we have impact on our society and our world, and at the other hand, the rapid pace with which our world changes, don't really match, because real estate is long-term, and we actually still build for eternity. So what happens? We make mistakes, and we find ourselves confronted, and I want to look specifically, for instance, at Holland, in our office market, where we have 20% structural vacancy in our buildings. We can see that we have made planning mistakes, we have monofunctional, derelict areas, and there's a clear need to rethink the way we plan our cities and buildings. And it's even more mind-boggling when you think we're all doing that in a system that we now call linear economy. Just consider the world, and consider that we have no income of resources, other than maybe a lost meteorite. We take something out of nature, we make something out of it, we use it, and then we throw it away. And with that, we have made a very effective waste production machine where we take easily attainable resources and we convert them into very hard attainable resources in the form of waste. And we see also the economic consequences of that. This is a picture from an article from New Scientist a couple of years ago. And the outer circle gives, for a number of materials, the estimated reserves we still have left in this world in years. And the inner circle shows what that reserve will be if the rest of the world would go to half US consumption. And you see, and when you look at the numbers, for instance, take here the silver, 29 years left, 9 years if we really would go on industrializing, we can see that with a lot of these resources, we might see scarcity within our lifetime. And you can also see it in the world. You see China taking strategic positions in Africa, controlling 95% of the world's rare earth minerals, buying the London Metal Exchange at 124 times its annual profit. You can see it in the price of resources. This is, for instance, copper, up 318% since 1998. And I look at Dutch CPI, 34%. That's a very significant rise. And you see, of course, the volatility of them, but the long-term rise is striking. This is copper ore, or iron ore, even more striking. More than 800% rise in the last 15 years. And when I look at this, and I'm an economist, I look at this and I think, not only business may be an engine for change, but this change is also an engine for business. We're developing a project in Amsterdam called Park 2020, where we apply cradle-to-cradle principles. And the essence of cradle-to-cradle is to rethink your design in a way that your materials come back in continuous cycles, either a biological cycle or a technical cycle. And by that, effectively eliminating the concept of waste. Waste. Think of waste. If, as a company, we could use waste, or what others consider waste in our industry, and we can monetize that, we can either lower our cost or raise our revenues. There's an economic model for that. So at Park 2020, we consider our buildings as material banks. There are hundreds of tons of materials inside buildings: steel, copper wiring, zinc, metals, concrete, wood, and they're all valuable resources, but we don't treat them as such. Actually, at the end of use period, a building has a negative cost, demolishment cost, and we think there is a revenue stream there. So in order to capture that and to see our buildings as material banks, we optimize the total lifespan of the building. And there's a clear connection between the value you have and the complexity in which you can keep the building. Now, obviously, if the building is released and it's used in its function, that's the highest form. Well, we don't know that. If we can reuse the core and shell of the building, and that building is flexible and we can reuse it, there's value in that. And the next step would be to use components and parts of that building and reuse them in other buildings. And in the end, it's the materials themselves, the raw materials, and if not, then you come into waste. It means we are designing for disassembly. So from day one, we consider our buildings to be taken apart and to lower our disassembly costs. And we're coming into a more industrial way of processing, where we use platform strategies, dry building methods, and everything is thought of beforehand. How do we take it apart and how do we lower those costs? The second thing we're doing is through our BIM model and also by integrating the whole supply chain of contractors, suppliers, and subcontractors into our system, and starting with them designing from day one, we're building a BIM model which comprises the whole building, but where we also put down the disassembly instructions, maintenance instructions, the nutrient value of each material, and also it's linked to a current value. So our material passport actually creates a current value of the materials inside that building. Very powerful, very complex tool. And the third thing we're doing, and this is quite interesting because we're working with cradle-to-cradle suppliers who also design their products to be taken apart, is that we apply what we call a product of service concept, where the manufacturers retain the ownership of their materials. And we enter into financial leases, not only for light fixtures, furniture, etc., but now also for facades and even steel constructions. And the economic model is here. Say this is, for instance, for a steel construction, the raw price of the steel used by the supplier. And this is the prices for the products we used, and the difference between that is its profit margins, its added value, its transport, etc. So we buy it at the blue line, and the manufacturer buys his stuff at the green line. And we put in a moment, let's say here, and we enter into, let's say, a 20-year lease by the end of the life. And we agree with our manufacturer that at least we put into the lease price the current price of his materials. So it means that I get a financial lease which only depreciates to the current material price. And at that point, we only depreciate during our use time that part. And at that point, the manufacturer is instead of this part, when we retain full ownership of the materials. Now at that time, the manufacturer is a very happy person because he gets back his materials at today's prices, but if you believe in the scarcity of materials and rising prices, he has a speculative advantage at this point, and at the same time he has hedged his buying position while getting a return because the building was used and generated return. And it means we avoid buying and investing all this part. So it's a different financing model, but it's also a different depreciation model, and we build in the end of lifetime on this value already through this construction. So by using this, we got real benefits. Instead of creating waste by buildings that need to be taken apart, we're using either the core and shell or parts of the components or the materials into new cycles. And thereby, we keep the element of waste out of this world. And for us, it's a very strong economic model. And what it actually does, it creates economic flexibility. Because one thing is we learned in this rapidly changing world is we don't know what the future will bring. And by shortening the needed lifespan of a building, we create flexibility. And in my ultimate dream, this is how I start development. And this is how it looks after I'm done with it. Exactly the same. Thank you very much. Come visit us.